To start now, I'd like to um, welcome Dr. Azra Raza to the PIDE webinar. Dr. Azra Raza is, mashallah, very well-known doctor, medical researcher from the now the US, originally from Pakistan. She comes from Karachi, I think. She'll tell us all about herself. But let me just quickly say, she is now a chaired professor in Columbia. She's a Chang Soon Chang Professor of Medicine and director of the MDS, which is an arcane form of cancer. I've just learnt about it reading a book. I will not profess to know anything about it except the little that I read from a book, of which I deciphered very little. So, but she's a professor of this very important form of cancer, and she's written extensively about it. A published author. But more recently, this is a book that is on the verge of being a bestseller. She's been a professor at many places. I won't go through her resume. She's got a number of papers around. But most importantly, another interesting thing to think about, she's also a literary figure. And you'll see her in the Lahore Literary Festival, as well as Think Fest. And there she'll be talking about Ghalib and poetry, not about medicine. But we thought we'd, pick her brain on medicine. In a book also, she quotes extensively from poetry, an envious repertoire. So I must say I was very impressed by knowledge of literature as well. But let me go ahead and start the webinar. Azra, PIDE is a public policy think tank. PIDE has very little to do with medicine, but public policy is a huge enterprise. It's trying to develop the whole of Pakistan. So I think we need to be informed of many subjects, and we try and keep ourselves very broad-based, and we are much more of a platform and a network than really an organization. So we are trying to network everybody. Samia is one of our honorary members. She's now a professor at LUMS. Samia is going to be co-moderating with me. Samia is the professor of LUMS. She's a doctor herself, a public health specialist, and she's participated in many PIDE events as well as done webinars for us. So Samia we regard as a PIDE member, although she's now being paid by LUMS, but that's besides the point. So PIDE is a broad-based intellectual network, and we love to connect Pakistani researchers from all over the world so that our people can learn. We are a small university too, and I want our kids to pick the brains of all Pakistanis like yourself. In any case, reading your book, First Cell. Her book's name is First Cell. I should also mention that. I should have put up a picture here, but I will. The First Cell book, which Azra has also graciously said that she will donate a few copies to PIDE so that we can give it to our students. First Cell was a fascinating book, I must say, because she was able to collect these lovely stories. Obviously, she has treated God knows how many thousand patients, but she was able to collect a few stories from her patients and present them in what should I say, the horror of their pain, but in such an empathetic fashion, in such a beautiful fashion, that honestly, one was carried away by their personalities, but while seeing their pain, but also being able to get insights into medicine. But what I found very interesting was that the similarities between the problem she's attacking, cancer, and the problem we are attacking, which is getting a society to move. And I thought it would be very interesting to have this webinar for everybody to see that, hey, research is research. The human quest is the same, that we're all trying to find answers to some things. And in any case, we need to learn about medicine and cancer. And so this is a happy combination. So I'm glad that I invited you. So let me begin by asking the first question, then Samia will take one question, we alternate questions. So Azra, I just want to take some quotes from your book, and just get you to connect the dots. So I picked out a few things. I mean, the most interesting thing that you begin with, you say emphatically in a few places, it is an embarrassment. Equally embarrassing is the arrogant denial of that embarrassment. And you're talking about cancer research. And I can say that about economic research. That's where I found the parallel. I find the same thing about my research, that, hey, we keep doing these things, but Pakistan goes nowhere. So, that's a problem. And you say, I could not have written this book when I was 30 years old. And I think there's a story there that you I think point out in your book, but I would like you to kind of go over that. And then you also say that in clinic, in scientific meetings, I've felt like a fraud, a posturing intellectual phony. A gaping disconnect between knowledge about cancer biology and the capacity to use this research to benefit patients is staggering. Yet cancer research for most part remains Paleolithic in comparison. And then you keep saying, you say that stay positive is the refrain, is as if it were a sin to voice the intense pain and suffering of cancer patients. So I thought I'd just begin here, get your views. How do you connect these things? I just picked up stray things from your book, but it'd be fun to hear how you connect them.
Thank you very much, Nadeem. Can you hear me properly?
Yes,
all of
very well, very well.
I'm so honored to be sharing this stage with you, but especially with Samia Altaf, who is a dear friend and a very admired and respected writer as far as the Raza family is concerned, because Samia has been contributing her brilliant pieces to Three Quarks Daily, which is, of course, the website my younger brother, Sayyid Abbas Raza, edits. And I must say that whenever I see Samia's name appear, it is a must read for me. And I have to control myself from constantly sending her complimentary messages, because her writing comes from the heart and addresses important issues. So young people, if you haven't read Samia, please go to Three Quarks Daily, just put in her name. You'll come up with such beautiful pieces that at least move me very deeply. So thank you, Samia, for taking the time for me today. Nadeem is, of course, a new acquaintance, but his sister is well known to me. And somehow we have never managed to meet because we live in different cities. But I'm also deeply honored to be invited to this forum today, especially so because I'm speaking to younger people. I'll begin with the first sentence that you read, that I could not have written this book 30 years ago. And it brings to mind, Nadeem, really the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest known written text that has been discovered only in the 19th century. But the idea is that in the epic, the protagonist, who is the hero and king and everything, wants to go out and make a mark on the world by discovering something great, and travels for many, many years, has all these adventures, comes back. And when he comes back, it's not the worlds that he has conquered, but the experiences he had in those years that made him the human being ready to accept defeats and challenges and successes all as part of life. And that is really the epic of, for me, is the epic journey that I have taken in the past 30 years. It's not what I have accomplished as much as what I have learned about various things. Things like cancer, things like human anguish, things like cancer research, what it means. And so I'll stop here and let you ask me the next question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Samia, go ahead. Samia, have we lost Samia?
Madam Samia, kindly unmute yourself.
Okay, if Samia is lost, then let me continue. Okay, I'd like you to tell me why you put out a brand new idea on cancer research, right? Why is it that you feel that cancer research, which is the most hotly researched and debated topic in the world, and probably one of the most important public health problems, why do you feel that the research on that is going nowhere? Because we are spending a huge amount of money not only researching cancer, but also treating cancer.
Yeah. So Nadeem, this brings me, I'd like to give a little bit of a background. I grew up in Pakistan, and I graduated from med school in Karachi. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm so deeply seeped in my own tehzeeb and culture and traditions, I never wanted to leave the country. But I knew if I stayed back in Pakistan, number one, my desire to do very advanced scientific research would be become secondary to being an activist. And I didn't want to become an activist. I was too intellectually engaged in the question of cancer. So I came to this country and I have been working here for 43 years now. And at the end of 43 years, guess what I am? An activist, of course. So one, you can't escape your fate, young people. And wherever you go, you will find problems in the field. And the main issue for me, and for any intellectual in the academy, in the humanities, in economics, for example, is that first we are dealing with an immediate problem. For me, the immediate problem is the patient who's sitting across the desk from me in clinic, and I'm trying to find the best solution for the patient. So I started my career by studying acute leukemia. Very soon, and within 8 years or so, I realized that this disease is so deadly and so complicated that in my lifetime, it will not be cured. Unfortunately, I was right, because young people think about this. In 1977, I began my career by treating acute myeloid leukemia patients with 2 drugs. Combination is popularly called 7 and 3 because it's 7 days of one chemotherapy, 3 days of another. In 2021, I'm still using 7 and 3. So what have I done in 43 years? But I knew that this is going to happen back in 1984. So I started paying attention to the stories my patients were telling me. Many of them said that their blood counts had fallen months, if not years, before they developed acute leukemia. And that stage is called pre-leukemia or myelodysplastic syndromes. So I said to myself, the disease must be much easier to handle if we find it at an earlier stage. And that's how I started to also study pre-leukemia and following these patients as they developed acute leukemia. And that's when I started saving samples in 1984, blood and marrow samples on my patients, because if I'm going to study the disease, I must have the samples. If I had gone to school in this country, my next step would have been to make a mouse model. But I was a naive immigrant who depended on instinct rather than tradition. And my instinct was, if I'm going to study human disease, I should have human samples. What do mice have to do?
Carefully for people to understand. You're saying that there is a certain paradigm that prevails in cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That cancer treatment remains the same as it has over the last 40, 50 years, roughly. And you use this very poignant term, slash, poison, and burn, right? Can you explain this a little bit and what the mouse model means, just so that people understand?
Thank you, Nadeem. That's a good prompt. So the idea from time immemorial, which is, let me just go back to 550 BC, Queen Atossa, the Persian queen, wife of Darius, daughter of Cyrus the Great, she developed a lump in her breast. This is 2,500 years ago. She tried to ignore it. It wouldn't go away. She covered it with sheets. It kept growing. So she asked her Greek slave to help her. He took out his sword and he slashed her breast. 2,500 years ago. Today, what are we doing for breast cancer for women? Slashing their breast. How did chemotherapy start? In 1917, the first use of chemical weapons in the Great War. It's now known as the First World War, but then we didn't know that we are going to have a Second World War, so we should call this one the first. We called it the Great War. Chemical weapons that were used showed that victims' blood counts dropped. And so these 2 smart pharmacologists, Goodman and Gilman at Yale, said, well, why don't we use these poisons to poison leukemia cells in the blood and marrow? And that's how chemotherapy started. And the first 3 chemotherapeutic drugs that were developed, Cytoxan, chlorambucil, melphalan. In 1940s, I used with my own hands on my own husband now. So the point I'm making is the same poisoning approach, the same slashing approach, and the burning approach, which means radiation therapy, we are using the same. Now, 2/3 of cancer patients we can diagnose at earlier stages of the disease, and using slash, poison, burn, we can cure them. But with the same horrendous therapy, right? We are curing them, but with horrible therapies. The 1/3 that we can't cure because they presented with advanced disease, unfortunately, their outcome is no different today in 2021 than it was in 1930. So the question I've asked is, where has $250 billion gone? $250 billion, where have they gone if we are still using these Paleolithic caveman approaches to treat cancer? Even if we are curing them, they deserve better. And the 1/3 we don't cure, we haven't shifted the needle one iota for the majority of them. Now, there have been little advances, CAR T therapy that helps 7,000 patients. What is 7,000 compared to the 20 million who will be diagnosed? You tell me. And that 7,000 also can only be treated in the ivory towers of the richest and most affluent country in the world. So what about our responsibility as citizens of the world in developing a compassionate cure? And my only conclusion is that the best news you can give to a cancer patient is, oh, you have cancer, but good news, we diagnosed early, we can help you. So why not diagnose early at the first stage rather than stage 1 at the first cell stage? So when I say the first cell stage, it is the earliest perturbations caused by cancer, the appearance of literally the first cancer cell, way before it becomes stage 1 disease that is detected by mammograms or colonoscopy or x-rays and scans. That's the difference. So over the last 30 years, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, what I have learned is with time that yes, I moved from acute leukemia to pre-leukemia. Then I realized after 20 years, no, pre-leukemia is too late. We need to go earlier than pre-leukemia. Why did some people get pre-leukemia? What was it that made them at high risk or susceptible to get this cancer? And that's when I started to think about, how do we find the first cell? Because by the time the disease is diagnosed, it's already 1 billion cells that have formed a tumor.
And I think you make a very good point that there is a search for the wonder drug that will cure the cancer. So we continue to seek more and more arcane drugs, which are more and more expensive. For example, they could be as much as $100,000, $200,000 a treatment, or for a year's treatment. And you make a case that you bankrupt families in that search. Whereas the biggest gain is from the first cell or the early diagnosis. And we don't put enough resources in the early diagnosis. Now, why is that? I mean, the pharmaceutical companies are engaged in the quest for better and better drugs, or how does it work? Why can't we shift the paradigm? Why is the paradigm still continuing to follow the search for the best drug?
So what you said about finding this magic treatment, we call it the magic bullet. This is the result of a very reductionist way of thinking. You see, the first cancer model that was proposed in the 1970s was that cancer is a disease of the genes. We have to find which particular genes went awry and started to malfunction because of a mutation or getting constitutively turned on for whatever reason, that everything can be reduced in a way to one gene. And then once we find what that abnormal gene is, we should find what is the abnormal protein it's making. And now we can target that one protein with one magic bullet. And you know, Nadeem and Samia knows this story very well. It worked in early on in 2 diseases, chronic myeloid leukemia and acute promyelocytic leukemia. We did find that one gene causes particular kinds of cancers, and we could find magic bullets. Chronic myeloid leukemia is cured now before it becomes acute leukemia with Gleevec, the drug imatinib, and acute promyelocytic leukemia is cured with vitamin A because we found that one gene was causing. Now, this seemed to prove the paradigm that the model is correct. And now everyone felt the reductionist approach is the right approach. We just have to find the one gene that causes pancreatic cancer, one gene that causes ovarian cancer, and then finding the drug won't be a problem. This is how we started to function. The problem is that by the time we sequenced the human genome, we found there are thousands of mutations in other cancers, that it can't be a reductionist problem. But Nadeem, the issue is that by now, younger people, they are too scared to exercise original ideas because they could make mistakes, and mistakes don't promote your career.
Yeah.
And the older people have spent 30 years doing the same thing. So how are they going to change? Their interest is, and the biggest problem is that our paychecks, you see, in the humanities, if I was employed by the Department of, say, Humanities at Columbia University, they would pay my salary. But because I am a professor and a researcher in the medical part of Columbia University, I have to raise my own salary through clinical work and bringing in research grants. So if my research grants are going to be reviewed by other researchers who have spent 30 years doing mouse model work and reductionist approach, then I have to continue to write those grants. And I told you, young people can't get away. So it's not like we are trying to perpetuate a model. And I'll say one last thing and then stop. My office at Columbia University has a beautiful view. When they were recruiting me and whining and dining me, I said, look, I don't need, any kind of big recruitment packages because I was bringing a ton of research money myself and I had an endowed professorship. So I said, give me an office with a view because I spend so much time in it and I work so much on looking out of the window. So actually the chief gave me the office next to him and I have one of the most beautiful views. But Nadeem and Samia, from my office, I can see George Washington Bridge. And every other day, there's a huge traffic jam. Now, if you wanted to find out the reason for a traffic jam, you see, one day the reason could be there was an accident. Another day because there was road construction going on and they had blocked. A third day because it's a malevolent, revengeful politician who's angry at the mayor of Fort Lee and is punishing him by causing backups, as you know happened a few years ago. But to find the cause of the traffic jam by looking into the individual car's engines, think of the reductionist approach is to start looking at the car's engine. Why is there a traffic jam? That's the problem. We are focusing, looking at a single cell and a gene in a single cell, whereas the whole body is being attacked by cancer and responding in crazy ways. So, but you see, to bring people to a new model of thinking, a new way of thinking, meets with resistance everywhere. However, once you invent a word processor, nobody thinks of the typewriter anymore. So my point is, I don't have to work too hard to try to change minds. I just have to show success of the new model. And that's what I'm going to show within this decade.
Good point. Very good. Excellent.
Wonderful,
Samia, you want
wonderful.
to come in? Have you got your voice now, Samia?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. We can hear you. Huh?
Ji, I'm so sorry. Azra was talking about me, और ना मैं और ना मेरा सिस्टम उसकी ताब ना ला सका और हम क्रैश कर गए.
Yeah, China come into the modern age. Yeah. Chalo.
So thank you so much, Azra, for your kind words, and it's such a privilege to be able to talk to you. I must say that I started to read your book, and I actually last year, and I just read the preface, and I found myself so overcome with your story and with the emotion and the poignancy which you had made a plea for this by bringing the human being in the middle of it. I thought it was just so touching and so much needed because the whole medical industry is moving towards this technology based model of care, and we are forgetting the human being. So I was very touched, and actually at that time I had to put it down because I was just so overwhelmed by that, because to some extent that is what our struggle is. Nadeem and I, from different perspectives, but at the same time from the same perspective, we are struggling with this, that just we talk about it, and I have been known to saying to people that GDP grow kar gaya ya kam ho gaya, GDP to bachon ne nahi khana na, people need food, and human beings need other things. So I just, and also it resonated very much with me because, as Nadeem has said in the beginning, that for jaise aapne kaha कि for the past 50 years You know, the cancer treatment is exactly the same. It hasn't changed. And from what I understood is that the providers of care and doctors who are oncologists and the health system that provides care refuses to see that they are not getting the results that they desire and that they anticipate. That also resonated very much with me because, you know, we've been saying that for the past 50 years we've been trying to fix the health systems of developing countries using the same methodology and the same model, and we are getting no results. And yet we don't have that discussion at all, that why are we failing? Why do we not have those results? So I was very touched at many levels by your book. So I now have a couple of questions for you. एक तो ये Azra, the question that has intrigued me very much, and I find that so prescient of you, that you know you were a young physician who had just finished her training. And I remember, you know, doing that in the United States myself. And I remember being completely clueless about what to do in future and what the future holds and where am I going to go. खैर मैं अभी भी काफी clueless हूँ, मगर उस वक्त तो बिल्कुल. So I am just so impressed by this fact that, you know, way back you were so prescient about this whole issue that you started to take tissue samples. तो थोड़ा सा आप उसका जवाब दीजिएगा, थोड़ी सी वो मैं सुनना चाहती हूँ. The other thing is that you raise this issue that you know the incentives for people. Of course, you know the rewards to young doctors and rewards to people who want to make a career are in an established going down an established path. And if they don't do that, there are no rewards, and there are a lot of incentives for going down that path, and a lot of disincentives for doing anything radical or doing anything new and anything of that kind. You know, I've also encountered that in public health. I actually, you know, started out to be a surgeon, and after 2 years of surgical residency, I switched to public health. You know, it has been a constant struggle to try and convince people that, you know, in the future the health systems will become very, very unmanageable and financially very, very difficult to maintain. So my question to you is that, and I heard you say that you know you will show results and that will speak for themselves. But the thing is that, you know, the hurdles. What are the hurdles that you see in that? Because, you know, these are very large systems, and, you know, of course, you know, you have a position and you have a place and a credibility and an authenticity and the kind of platforms that you have, that I feel that there is no doubt that you can be very, very effective. But still, you know, turning large systems over, they have an inertia and an inner momentum which keeps going down one route. So ye thoda sa speak to that, please, if you can. I'm sure you have lots to say.
Such brilliant questions. I didn't expect anything less from you, Samia. Very nice.
You are too kind.
Oh, I remember the dinner we had at my place last year,
Yes,
just before the lockdown. It was so wonderful. How much poetry we exchanged that day.
We exchanged lots of poetry.
Well, I'll answer all three of your questions. I'll try to be brief. Your first question is that, well, I grew up in Pakistan. I come here, do my training. How was I so prescient? I come back to the patient over and over. And thank you for pointing out the fact that in my book, I have looked at every issue, whether it's related to policy or big pharma or to research, clinical, basic. I've looked at everything through the prism of human anguish. Because ultimately, the responsibility for every one of us is to reduce human suffering. And if by our actions, instead of reducing it, we are hurting humans, then shame on us. And that's what I meant by it is an embarrassment that Nadeem quoted earlier on. So when I came to this country, I kept paying attention to the patient. And when I am unable to find the answer to the patient, it kept forcing me to think, well, what else is around? How else can I help the patient? So once you move out of the patient, you look at the family, the community, the wider society. What are the bigger policies? Why are we where we are? And it isn't that I woke up overnight, it happened sequentially. There were many falls, many disasters, but I kept sticking to the patient. The central theme was always that. I want young people are in this audience. And you asked a very good question. Well, how do you carve out a niche for yourself, which is different than the established voices? How do you become anti-establishment when your career depends on being part of the establishment? I want to say one thing here, which is that to the young people, please do not wear fighting with everybody as a badge of honor. That is not a good idea. I don't encourage you going out at a young age of 26 or 36, waving your sword and trying to strike down everybody. Your job is to work as hard as you can to make a success of your point first. So don't, the fact that you have to be a professor, for example, at 39, I became a professor and with an endowed professorship. But was that my goal in coming to America, that I'll go to an Ivy League school and get an endowed professorship? This is my third one. If that was my goal, I should have sat back on my laurels. Young people do not make things like that your goal. But they are important for your career because, yes, that is what establishment is going to appreciate. You need to work within the establishment, but what I want to tell you is you need to create your own audience by showing success after success. So by trying to work hard as you can, use every intellectual, spiritual, emotional faculty to bear on your work, and be so sincere that people around you are affected and say, yes, this person is working very hard. And if there is any merit to this project, let's give her a chance. And that's how it kept developing into a. So I didn't go out fighting with everybody. In fact, my husband used to be the fighter because he came from Brooklyn, New York. And then he would fight with everybody, Samya, and then he would turn to me with the chair of medicine, with the dean of the medical school, with president of the university. He would fight with everyone, then turn to me and said, now you go and Azra them. Azra them meant I have to now use all my diplomacy and intellect and emotions to calm them down and say, well, this is what he was really trying to say, not to fight with type thing. So the Azra them should not be taken in a derogatory way. The point is that you create an audience for what you want. Like Steve Jobs said, people don't know what they need. I'm going to tell them what they need. They need an iPhone that looks so beautiful. He created the taste. We didn't know we had that taste for an iPhone. So young people, your job is to be so sincere to what is in front of you right now. Work so hard that you are the best person that you can be, not competing with others, but competing with yourself, that I can do better. Do that. And within the establishment, you should top in your class. You should take every test that is offered to you, and keep doing the right thing. And believe me, somebody will hear you. And final question that you asked was related to, there are so many vast areas involved, Samya, you pointed out correctly. And my thing is, yes, we need research, we need technological improvement, but we also need education, not just of the field, but of the public in general. And finally, we need to make policy changes that are not going to happen overnight, but policy changes follow successes, believe me. And so the idea is that we work hard, we stick to and we change. Don't be afraid to change, young people. If you think that you started with this idea for some reason, if you change now, people will think you're inconsistent, you're a fool of some kind. No, only a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, said Emerson in his famous essay, Self-Reliance. So if you are foolishly consistent, that's going to be the end of you. No, change with the time, change with the technology, be open to new ideas, and finally build a consensus around you always, which means yours shouldn't be the lonely voice. If you really have a point to make, other people will understand. And you know what happened? I mean, people ask me, oh, you must feel like an injured animal of some sort because you are, no, I don't feel like that at all. In fact, I'm very well respected and invited everywhere, nationally, internationally, even though I speak with a different voice. But as soon as we went on to the lockdown and I got introduced to Zoom, you know what I did? I created the oncology think tank. And I invited 30 of the top leaders from the country, from Harvard and MD Anderson and Johns Hopkins and University of Chicago, name it, all the top places. They're leaders in oncology. And so we started meeting 2 hours every week. Samia will understand this because imagine getting 30 people together who believe that they are halfway to pick up their Nobel Prizes anyway. How hard it is to get them to meet every week for 2 hours, 17 meetings, came up with an opinion paper that is now charting out the route to the first cell. We published it in Scientific American just 2 weeks ago. Go and look at it, kids.
Okay.
And now that I have a consensus of 30 voices, 25 leaders of academia, and 5 from top industries, including Regeneron, which has just made the monoclonal antibodies that saved President Trump's life. These top leaders are the ones who are interested in early detection of cancer technology, not early detection as stage 1, but the first cell. And they are listening to me. So now we have a 30-member panel. The head of oncology at Harvard is on it. I mean, really big names are on it. So you build consensus. Don't try to fight the system, but rather change the audience, change the rhetoric by showing excellence and sincerity.
But Azra, the problem that we have here is that, I don't know whether it's a colonial mentality or whatever it is, young people seem to want to follow rather than lead. They want to copy what's happening in the West rather than stake out a claim for themselves. Now, how important is it for you to start thinking differently at a very young age? And should you try and form your own hypotheses and theses at a young age, or should you wait till a later age to do that?
Nadeem, I think that the young have an arrogance, of course. At 24, I was sure I'll cure cancer in 5 years. And you can't take that away from them because that is a spirit that the young have. And I admire the spirit, respect it, and only encourage it. But they will be beaten into submission by time and fate, as you know.
As we all are.
I think it's important to think differently, but I think it's also important to always appreciate how little you really know at 24. That you really, what you need is read every single day. You see all the books around me. I'm the owner of 15,000 books. Why? Because reading every single day, not just science, but fiction and literature and poetry and history, everything is important for you. So you can't imbibe all that and think that you're going to change the world at the ripe old age of 7 or something. No, I mean, think it, but at least keep working towards doing it in a different way. So I feel like young people in Pakistan, you are saying they're followers. The ones I meet, they are very revolutionary in thinking, and they think they can, sitting from Pakistan, and I love it. And the best proof is that just 2-3 weeks ago, it was announced, or maybe a few months ago, Forbes magazine has a 30 under 30 list, which means 30 people under 30 years of age who are future leaders in technology. Out of 30, 4 are from Pakistan. And one of them, Asad Malik, go look him up. He's doing augmented reality. This kid at 24 graduates from Binghamton. He comes from some village in Punjab, graduates from Binghamton. And Nadeem, can you believe that they took him immediately on their board? Where Buddhas like 65-year-olds sit. This 24-year-old is serving there on the board. So the fact is our kids are much smarter, I feel, than
Fair enough.
anywhere.
Let me bring you to another question that I think should be explained. You talked about reductionism, and you talked about the traffic problem, and you talked about the heterogeneity of cancer and the complexity of cancer. And you also had this very interesting story, and you should tell that story about Ayub Umayya. and also introduce Umayya Sahib to people. I mean, he's another person I got to know well in Washington. Lovely man, and also a man of letters and a man of, wide reading, including singing opera. So, if you can comment, relate the Umayya story, tell us about reductionism, complexity, and how you see the world uh, as a complex whole, and how cancer can be an emergent phenomenon.
Yeah, beautiful questions. Thank you. Well, kids, I did a little rotation at George Washington University. That's part of my residency and fellowship. So I was at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Ayub Umayya was the neurosurgeon, head of neurosurgery there. And of course, I had known of him and met him through family connections already. So we started having lunch together every day for several months. We did that while I was there. And we had the most interesting conversations, Nadeem and Samia, because I was like 26 at the time. And here he was a godlike figure. Dr. Umayya had invented a small balloon-like thing which you could insert with a tiny incision. You could insert this little balloon that would connect directly to the ventricles in the brain, and now you could inject chemotherapy. It would just, you could close the skin over it, the incision was closed, and now people could get therapy for brain tumors directly just through an injection. Especially for kids with leukemia, it's very important because it invades the spinal cord and the brain tissues. It's called the Umayya Reservoir. And Dr. Umayya was very famous already because of this Umayya Reservoir. But as Nadeem said, he was a true Renaissance man. His interests in all kinds of arts and humanities and humanity in general, the suffering of humanity, but very deep thinker about neurologic issues. And so I asked him one day during lunch, I said, Dr. Umayya, what level of reductionism do you think will be required at the brain level to find the root of consciousness?
Reductionism bhi bata dein. Please tell me what reductionism.
Reductionism is simply what it means, that you keep cutting, slicing down to the very basic point, keep reducing things to their essential principle. So, for example, we start with the brain, we go to the gray matter, then we go to the neural tissue, then we go to a neuron, then inside the neuron, there are a trillion molecules. Which molecule do we look at? The nucleus, cytoplasm? Should we look at organelles or should we look at surface markers? You know, what level of, how is consciousness arising? And the example he gave me was very beautiful. He said, Azra, look at the Taj Mahal, how beautiful it is. Now, if you want to find the secret of its beauty by taking it apart brick by brick, to thinking that somehow I'm going to reach some molecular level at which I'll find the cause for its just stunning, staggering magnificence, then you are wrong, because what you'll end up with by taking things apart is rubble and trash, nothing else. It's the whole, which is greater than some of its individual parts, that's giving it the beauty. And that emergent property, which is bigger than the sum of its individual parts, is complexity. And another explanation I use in the book for complexity is simply this. Water, you freeze it, it becomes ice. You haven't changed any fundamental components of water. They're still hydrogen and oxygen, the same proportion. But when they become ice, how do you explain the slipperiness of ice? It's an emergent property. It does not depend on the number of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, because then water should be slippery like ice, and it's not. That's the difference between reductionism and an emergent property. An emergent property or complexity is far greater, unpredictable, unexpected, coming out of something which you never thought would happen. And so Dr. Umayya opened my eyes to start thinking very differently from an earlier stage in life. And thanks to him, I now have several shelves of chaos and complexity and all kinds of things I started reading in science immediately because of him, to broaden my way of thinking. Yes, reductionism is not going to get us ultimately. It is important in some things, but in the final analysis, remember, the farther you go out into the sea, the deeper it gets.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so sometimes it's better to think of things from an opposite perspective.
Hmm. Hmm. Tell me, what role does the funding play? For example, we've got a very arcane system of research that we've copied in Pakistan. HEC has copied it, which is basically that you have funding and then you have peer review, and peer review drives funding and peer review drives your promotion, etc. And you've written about that in your book too. And you are not quite happy with it. So how does, what's your critique? How should it be changed? How should we look at it?
Yeah. I think there are three models of funding here in this country that we can follow. The first is that you apply for formal grants that are being offered by, say, government institutions like the National Institute of Health, the FDA, things like that. A second one is, of course, philanthropic funding, where you go to Bill Gates and say, I have such a big idea, can you fund this? And um, you might do it. Or you apply to philanthropic organizations like the Leukemia Lymphoma Society that is formed by members who want to improve outcome for cancer patients. And a third model in this country, which is very interesting, is that of inviting venture capitalists and say, look, I have this idea. If you put $100 million in me today and help me develop this idea, then you can make $1 billion in 5 to 7 years. So there are various models now in this country. Also, big pharma can fund you to join their research and development endeavors. I feel that in every single case, what matters is the merit of your idea, really. And, the last thing I'll say about it is that every technologic company in America that is successful, if they employ 1,000 employees, 100 will be purely technical people, 100 out of 1,000, like writing the algorithms, sitting all day and simply working on one little how to do, how to use one click to get to this particular site, and they will spend their whole life doing that. But 900 employees will be not technology related at all. They'll be humanities graduates, because they're the ones who are going to do the marketing, the education, the policy formation and changes. In other words, you can know how to do something and what to do as a technologic person. But why you should do it, how will it help humanity, how can you make some profit out of it, all those things come from a completely non-technical background. So I think it's very important to remember when you are applying for funding and thinking about it, that you think of both aspects, not just, okay, I want to look at this gene, how will, that's what you want to do, how will I look at it, I will CRISPR in a mutation in this gene and see how its abnormal function develops. So that's what you will do. But why are you doing it? Why this gene? How will it help a cancer patient? Those questions you have to think about and pay more attention to them when applying for grants, to convince at an emotional level someone who now has ownership. They become so convinced that it becomes their project. That means improve your communication skills. Sorry, Samya. Go ahead.
I have a question
Right.
that's follow-up of yours.
Mhm.
So, Alva, this recent COVID, COVID hullabaloo, it has kind of filtered out a lot of problems in the system in systems in the United States. Where they are deficient, and what is missing and what needs to be done. And of course, with the new administration taking over, there seems to be a very serious commitment towards doing something and improving systems as we go forward. So USSE related, I have two questions. I know that and we were very proud to hear that at that time that Vice President Biden had invited you जो उनका moonshot vision था उसका to be in charge of that or to get your feedback on that. So if you can tell us a little bit about that aspect. And the other thing is that how do you see now do you think that the funding and the focus will move towards this infectious disease mitigation systems or hospital improvements and all of that? And how does this impact your work? Do you see that happening?
Well, you're absolutely right, Samya, that COVID to me has served like an X-ray machine. It's allowing us to see all that is wrong behind that, the skin and bones. We are looking straight through now and seeing, Samya, at Columbia University, if I want to bring in a new clinical experimental trial, it takes 6 months to a year to get it approved. Usually 9 to 10 months. You know how long it took us to get the COVID remdesivir trial approved? 9 days.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, probably a week. Yeah,
literally a week. So we know it can be done. It was all the same systems, the internal review committee, the IRB committee, this committee, that. It could be done. What we are saying is you treated a problem as urgent and you find the solution, which means you're not treating the cancer problem as an urgent problem. That's what it's pointed out. That cancer should be dealt with not as an individual issue, but as a population crisis. It's facing an urgent crisis is for the whole population. Second question you asked about Vice President Biden. I felt very proud to be invited, and little had I dreamt living in Pakistan that one day I'll be sitting at the National Observatory in the dining room and exchanging like hi, hello with the Vice President. And Samya, it was very interesting. I started talking about cancer and he kept stopping me. But where are you from, Dr. Raza? I said, Pakistan. Then he launched on a long, because we had 9 other people, launched on a long thing about his interaction with Benazir, how much he loved her, what a charismatic woman he was. And then he started telling us his own stories with Benazir and Pakistan. And it was very sweet. I mean, he was so engaging because he was more interested in me as a person also. You see, that I think is a people's skill. That's why he's sitting in the White House today. Because at that, for those 15, 20 minutes, no one else existed in the room except me for him. And he just having this conversation with me. Of course, I presented my ideas somehow to him, but I think, the usual mafia then descended and took away all the money for research and not for early detection. You know how that happened. But, I'm not someone to be stopped easily either. I keep attacking from different angles. And your last question is very important about where will the future take us? And I wanted to say that the future of all of healthcare, not just cancer, is going to be one of not reactive, but proactive. Reactive means we see disease, we treat it. Now, future will be we try to detect the footsteps of the disease way in advance. Think of heart disease. We have dropped the mortality from heart disease by 70%. Why? Not only because we are stenting diseased coronary arteries or performing bypass surgery, but because we are lowering cholesterol by preventing those things from happening. Look at infectious diseases. It's not that we have very smart antibiotics and antifungals and antivirals, but we have vaccines to prevent polio, prevent diphtheria, prevent tetanus, things like that. So we have learned that no matter which healthcare you take, diabetes, heart disease, strokes, we should be Alzheimer's, we should be preventing them because by the time they are diagnosed, they're too advanced, all of them. A stroke has already happened. Now we're trying to get the limb to work again. No, we should have prevented this stroke by intervening 10 years. So the future will be every individual will have a cloud of billions of data points that are being collected by their Fitbits and by these little chips. You can put a drop of blood and it will measure all kinds of important metabolites and send this information directly to your iPhone. This chip is already FDA approved from Columbia University and detect PSA. Now we are trying to develop a tiny little chip that we can, at Columbia, me and the biomedical engineers, that we can insert under the skin at birth. And this will constantly be monitoring for the appearance of the first cell. And then all you have to do is pass a little sonogram-like device onto this where your chip is inserted once a month, once every 6 months, and that will show you how many cells have been trapped there or what are the metabolites that are circulating that can tell us the earliest markers of disease. So I think the future will be with clouds, with billions of data, with dynamic information about vital signs, blood pressure, things like that, blood sugar level, all kinds of metabolite levels being fed into the data cloud also. And then the doctor's job will only be to look at a screen, see through artificial intelligence what has been now through machine learning of these billions of data point over my head in the iCloud, what is AI saying is the most likely diagnosis I'm going to have 3 years from now? Will it be heart disease or will it be Alzheimer's? We can tell already 8 to 10 years in advance. I have caught the first cell. I hope you guys will attend my lecture at Aga Khan, which I'm giving at on March 2nd, where I'm going to show the pictures of the first cell actually, which we have trapped 4 years in advance of actual cancer appearing.
Wow.
So you see, the future is all going to be prevention rather than cure, monitoring wellness to detect illness way before it has become disease. That's what the future holds.
But Azra, I think this we've been hearing for a long time. But some books have been written. A guy Topol who writes about it too. But the question is, your medical profession, will they accept it? Because even today, for example, what I find amazing is that my records, whatever records that I have, I don't have them. They're lying with different doctors. Why can't my records, for example, be in the cloud? So when you are saying this, the doctors have a vested interest in making me come to them all the time, right? Will they accept this cloud and this thing? Is the human element going to be there or not?
It's a very good question. And your criticism is very well placed, Nadeem. And of course, I faced this for 40 years, the same thing also. So you're not alone. I feel the same way. But I have so much confidence that if thanks to Steve Jobs, if a woman sitting for example, Faisalabad, has in her hands a computer that is millions of times faster than the largest computer that ever existed in 1970s, she now, standing in a field of wheat, is holding this computer and, connecting to someone in Fargo, North Dakota, some family member who has gotten a green card and gone. This is the power of technology. And how many people did you need to convince? Nothing. The thing, if it's successful, will catch on. That's the key. And in science and technology, we are a little better off because technology just has to show, like the iPhone showed. We have to just show that early detection. If I show that coming out and say, I can find the first cell, who am I targeting? And I don't want to scare anybody, but 1 in 5 new cancers are diagnosed in a cancer survivor. And so, in other words, people who have beaten one cancer are at high risk of getting another. So why not just keep taking their blood every 6 months and looking for these markers I'm talking about? And then this is what I have developed, a first cell center for cancer survivors as part of the think tank. All the universities are taking part in it. Just yesterday, I got the approval for the center. We have received a very large funding grant for these universities to work together to simply collect the samples from 50,000 cancer survivors in the next 2 years. Between all of us, the various universities, MD Anderson sees 80,000 cancer patients, survivors a year, 80,000 survivors. If they give us 20,000, for the samples, then within 2 years, we'll have 50,000 samples and maybe 300 people have developed a second cancer already. So we go back to just study those 300 patients and say, this is the first cell right here. This is the footprint. And once I publish it and say, look, in cancer survivors, I could detect cancer 3 years in advance. Then cancer survivors will step up and say, well, I want to be a part of this. I want to be monitored. I'd rather know 2 years in advance and have my first cell removed, or whatever diet or lifestyle change I should make. That's my whole idea. So you're right. We've been hearing about early detection, but that early detection has been through mammograms, colonoscopy. They're primitive things. Colonoscopy is putting a tube in someone's gut and trying to look for cancer. By the time you find that tumor, it's too big. I'm saying use the latest technology to move back, find it early, and take care of it right then and there. And don't let it develop.
And also, these tests are not very efficient, if I remember right.
Yes, they are completely inefficient. But still, it is thanks to screening and anti-smoking campaign that we have been reducing the mortality from cancer through early detection and anti-smoking campaign 1% a year for the last 30 years, which means that it has dropped by 27%. And all of it is related just to mammograms, colonoscopy, PSA, pap smears, and anti-smoking campaigns. I'm saying even that is too far gone. We need to move back.
Let me take a couple of questions from the floor. Shahid? Shahid, go ahead.
Jay, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Azra, thank you so much for this very nice talk. Thank you. This is indeed great talk. And it's interesting that you talked about cancer and discussed it so much. I lost my father about 1.5 years ago to cancer. My mother is presently on her deathbed due to cancer. So my question is a short one. What should we all do, the ones present here? In my position, I'm a bit afraid now, if you can understand. I mean, it's a bit of a uncertainty because it didn't used to happen in my family. None of my grandfathers or grandma had cancer, but my father died of cancer. And now my mother, she's probably not going to survive long. So what can you advise us all in this regard?
Well, Shahid, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about your father. Very sorry that your mother is suffering, and my heart goes out to you. I don't think that there is any much difference in treatment in the US versus Pakistan. In Pakistan, the same people are cured with slash poison burn that we are curing here. So first of all, I want to set your mind at ease that whatever could be done, I'm sure they're doing it in Pakistan already. Yes, they don't have, experimental trials and access to a few therapies, which are anyway, even in America, very few people have access to. I think set your mind at ease that everything that could be done has been done medically by the oncologists. However, if your mother is facing a terminal illness, I hope not, but if she is, then instead of losing hope, when you're faced with an issue like that, you can't plan long term because obviously long-term planning may not come to pass. So you actually start paying attention to the moment. You have your mother now. Instead of worrying about what will happen 3 months from now, 6 months or a year, and constantly driving yourself crazy about what no one can tell you about, I recommend to you that you start enjoying her every moment, celebrating her, getting your family, giving her the emotional support that she needs. Give her I mean, you don't have to tell any kinds of lies or make up things, but you don't break her spirit. You keep giving her hope for the next day, that tomorrow so and so will come visit, we can do this or that. I mean, you don't have to engage in any kind of confabulations to give strength and emotional support to people who, for whom time is a real issue. And believe me that people who are facing mortality actually have a good inkling about it, and they're very scared about it. And you don't have to beat them on the head with kind of conversation. So I hope that this advice will help you celebrate her life, whatever is there of it. And I hope it will be a long one, rather than you losing hope or being discouraged. But the last thing you mentioned is very important, that you're now concerned about yourself because there seems to be a long family history. Yes, family histories are sometimes important, like breast cancer, especially when associated with mutations in certain genes like BRCA1 or 2, etc. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Don't get scared, because its familial cancers are rather rare.
Okay, Rania Tahir. Rania.
I'm sorry again, sir. Actually, it's my daughter's name again. I'm Mahmood Khalid. I'm from PIDE, and it has been a very informative talk, and it's a different topic normally which we have on our webinars. But in fact, in our health economics department, we had 2 theses on this subject. And in fact, because in Pakistan, since there is no cancer registry, so the students actually worked on this aspect, and they tried to collect some data in terms of what types of patients are coming into the hospital. And the reason for us was basically to look for the cost effectiveness in terms of who gets to the hospital at what point in time, and what are the administrative and other costs. But my question is that would the experience be different for a cancer patient because of their genetic structures, their living behaviors and others in terms of Pakistan versus any other developed country? The reason to ask this is that if we go long in terms of developing some kind of a preventive strategy, that has to be taking into consideration what sort of factors are basically the determining factors. Thank you.
Ji.
Look, I think that there is no substitute for science. I mean, I can't tell you that you can prevent cancer sitting in Pakistan by eating fewer eggs. Technology has to be there. The whole idea is that the first world or the developed world is able, they're affluent enough to invest in 100 projects, 3 of which can be paradigm shifting. And 97 will fail completely, and that money will be lost. Only in a few countries, I would say only in America right now, can that happen. And so technology has to be developed by people here, and there is no substitute for it. I hope that answers your question. In that sense, I think that importing technology and asking your own set of questions to start monitoring patients for the appearance of the first cell, you could do the largest trial very quickly, because people would be so much more willing to participate in trials. So I think that living in an area like Pakistan, you try to use the instruments for research that are available, the best ones that you can apply, and apply them to your own population and ask the questions that are relevant to your population. I think Pakistan would be an absolute hotbed for finding the first cell. Even though the technology is being developed here, it will become, instantly available everywhere. That's the beauty of science.
Ayaz Ahmed.
Thank you, sir. Madam, very interesting lecture. My question is very simple. Which type of diet one can use in order to stop the growth of the cancer germs?
I wish, Yas, that it was so simple that simply changing your diet would stop the growth of cancer. So do not listen to anyone who's trying to tell you this kind of stuff. There have been, since I came to America, waves of this fashionable ketogenic diet where you only eat protein and starve the tumor. All those things cannot work on advanced cancers. So the idea of how to prevent cancer is the most important one. Don't eat carcinogenic things like processed foods. Don't have these drinks which are filled with chemicals. Try to eat healthy. Try to maintain a lifestyle that is keeps you moving and keeps you in good shape. And those are the only things you can do, hopefully, to prevent any chronic disease. But there is no proof that any of these things in the long run will be sufficient by themselves to avoid diseases.
Asma Haider, Dean of IBA. Asma Haider. Asma, unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Azra. It was very interesting talk. So I just want to hear your comment on, for instance, you talked about advancement in medicine and inserting a chip, for instance, in human body. But what do you think about it? For instance, Pakistan is still struggling with malaria, for instance, the simplest thing. And similarly, we are still fighting with the child mortality is very high because of the diarrhea. And treatment is extremely simple. And similarly, many of the African countries are, after decades, they are still fighting with the HIV and AIDS. So what is your comment? So my worries are about the huge inequalities in health that exist between the developed and developing countries. Yeah, that's fine. The technology, it's very easy to transfer the technology, but still we are not maybe adopting it. So what is your comment on that?
Thank you, Asma. You've asked the hardest question. The fact that I am an oncologist and researcher by no means makes me an expert on the kind of question you're asking, the policy related questions, how to implement and how to really educate the public. You're absolutely right that if malaria and, infant mortality through infectious diseases is still an issue in underdeveloped world, it is really an embarrassment and a shame on all of us. We need to develop those areas and pay attention to them. But this is what I've always been impressed by in Pakistan, that on the one hand, with the simplest things we are unable to do. We are unable to educate our children properly. We are unable to ensure proper health care for a pregnant woman and early care for the newborn, etc. But on the other hand, we have the atom bomb, which is absolutely the most complicated thing you could ever think of doing. So it means, once again, that the country, the intellect, the resources are there if they want to do something. They can even produce an atomic bomb. By the way, for the students, everyone who's listening to me, you see my big library, but there is one book that is the best book I have ever read, The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. Do read it, because not just about physics and how the atomic bomb was made during the Second World War, but it also gives you a perspective into the questions that Asma is asking about, related to policy. How do you apply it? How do you think of the human issues involved in developing an atomic bomb? My point in all this, Asma, is simply this, that I feel your pain. I wish I could have a glib answer for it. I don't. I do think that Pakistan has the intellect and the resources to do what they want. And proof of the pudding is that when they wanted, they could build the atomic bomb. It's the same thing I said about COVID-19 protocols for treatment can be approved in 9 days in my institution, and a cancer trial takes a year to be approved. We know that all the machinery that is needed is there. It's the will. So what is the will of the Pakistani people? Are they willing to pay attention to impoverished children, or are they more interested in whatever other areas they invest in. I'm not really good at this at all. I would say that that all of us, because I consider myself very much a Pakistani, and whatever I can do at my level to help, I do it. We should all work towards creating the audience that I started to talk about in the beginning, for people to expect better things from us, not to only be benefiting a small group of people who the haves and at the expense of the have-nots. The have-nots should have rising expectations of what to get, and then I think people will have to distribute resources better. And you have just broken my heart by saying kids are dying of malaria or infectious diseases of any sort, like infant mortality, and simple things can't be implemented. It's really a very huge tragedy.
Samia, do you have any last questions or thoughts?
Yes, Nadeem, I do, and I will, just add to what Azra has said. Exactly, that's always been my point. That Pakistan, if Pakistan can build the atomic bomb, I just struggle and I fight everywhere to say why can't we build, basic minimum health system and a health services delivery system that can cater to the needs of these kids, who are malnourished and stunted, and women who are basically just dying in delivery, dying in childbirth, just for lack of blood transfusions and for lack of timely cesarean section. So yeah, that is a question of prioritizing. Who is your priority? Like Azra said, Pakistanis are very smart, and they are hardworking and they want to do that. But to me, it seems, in my experience of 30 years of doing this, that this is the citizen in Pakistan is not really a priority for the policymakers. That's what I have to say with really a lot of sadness. That to me it seems very clear that if the average citizen was a priority of the policymakers, they would do it. And it's not lack of funding. I mean, you look at the amount of money that has been invested in the Pakistan's EPI program, the extended program for immunization, specifically the polio program. Millions and millions of dollars. And yet, even today, just 4 weeks ago, I had gone for a visit to Kasur, which is a kind of a rural district, and it's just about 50 miles driving distance from Lahore, where I live. And when people find out that there is a doctor who's come from the city, a lot of people gather in the health center that I was sitting in, and women come and they talk about their problems and children. So a woman actually told me that just the other day her child died. She was crying, and she had come for examination because she was trying to get pregnant for the past 6 months, and she wasn't being very successful. And she was very thin and very emaciated and looked very anemic. So I told her, and she was young, maybe 19 years old. So I said that you are young, and you need to build up your own strength before you start to have another baby. So she said, no, I've been married for 4 years and I've already had one baby who died. So I just started talking to her and asked her, how did that baby die? So from what she described, Azra, I tell you, it was diphtheria. And imagine we are in the 21st century, and just 4 weeks ago or 6 months ago, a child just 50 minutes drive from Lahore is dying of diphtheria. So it's just a very, in many ways, a very heartbreaking situation. I wish there was some way to have policymakers, kind of focus on this. The Prime Minister Imran Khan, in his maiden speech that he gave in, I think, July of 2018, I found it very encouraging and very heartening, because we had been, seeing him come to power and speak about all these things. And he spent almost 35 minutes of that maiden speech on infant mortality rate, on poor nutrition, on stunting in Pakistani children, on unacceptably high maternal mortality rate. And those of us who were listening to him, we were so encouraged and so heartened. But again, if you look at what's happening, it's back to square one. New hospitals are being built, there's nothing wrong with building hospitals, but a hospital, like you said, is really the last stop. It's not the first stop. So I don't know, Asma. I'm basically an optimist person. And like Azra, I will keep fighting and I will keep pushing and I will find other means to do it. But there are times when one feels very heartbroken.
Good for you. Azra, there is a last question coming from a strange quarter, my wife here. She's listening.
Oh, can I see your wife? Adab.
Assalamualaikum. I am so very proud of you in so many ways. I love the fact that you're a poet, and I myself am an artist and a poet, and a very unlikely person to be in this webinar. But I admire you so much because in order to be a healer, you have traveled far beyond the borders of simply medicine. You're beautifully read. Don't shrug like a modest shrug. You have. And I think in the world, we need more healers than just doctors and medicine people. I myself, my experience with doctors has been that I've been patronized. They talk down to me. They think I know nothing about my own body. In today's age, everyone has the internet. Everyone knows what goes on, what goes into making a human body and how it functions. So I have a question, how can everyone be encouraged in every field to take a holistic view to life in general, to open new frontiers for themselves, just like Dr. Ramaya, may he rest in grace. When I met him, he just blew me away. And this was many decades ago. And we lost him too early. But I find that in every field, we have tunnel vision. Chago economics, so forgive me, everyone. Chahe wo medicine ho, or even in poetry. In Pakistan, we tend to get stuck in the classics. So you as a teacher and a healer can reach out to everyone to at least try to step into the world of maybe metaphysics, not religion, to of course is with us, लेकिन creativity की तरफ थोड़ा सा तो जाए ना सारे, little bit. Dr. Samia, I think, will agree with me. I've known her for many, many years. Because in the end, everything is connected. I was stuck in a rut. I couldn't write, I couldn't paint, and I took Bio 101 at the National Community College, local community college. And it really broke down many dams for me. So that is my question. Please reach out to people to explore at least possibilities so they can. Thank you. And I love you for what you are doing.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know your name.
Oh,
Farida.
Farida, don't disappear. I want to talk to you. Thank you so much for those heartfelt remarks. I'm duly honored and really flattered that you took the time to listen to this, even though it's not your field, like you said. I want to respond to you seriously because what the issues you have raised are very serious issues. First of all, let me thank you for thinking I'm a poet. I'm not. I just have a good memory and I memorize poetry of the great Asatiza, because I think two lines of a share are like the double helix of the DNA, two strands of the DNA for me. A macrocosm is contained in 14 words by Ghalib in 2 lines, and a macrocosm of instructions to make a protein that will make hemoglobin is contained in 2 little strands of DNA. So also poets, of course, and scientists are very curious by nature, like you are. You are an artist, but yet you went to Bio 101. And that changed your life because both of them involve curiosity and paying attention to detail. And that's what we do in poetry and both. I think the question you ask is a very important one, that how do we look at any problem in a holistic way and not with a tunnel vision? That's your question. I have maybe a very simplistic answer. I hope I'll make sense of it through a poem that I'll end with in honor of Farida. My answer is, Zahir ki aankh se na tamasha kare koi, ho dekhna to deed-e dil va kare koi. Open the eyes of your heart, have empathy, and then whatever subject you are looking at, whether it's cancer or economics, it's mathematics, or it's English literature, the eyes, the lens of empathy will change everything, because now you're going to exchange places with the person who's dealing with the problem. And then you will look at it in a holistic way. So my suggestion is just that. And then, of course, all our poets have at one time or another, Farida, have basically held a kind of challenge for the greatest healer of all times, who is Hazrat Isa, a great prophet who could raise the dead, right? Lazarus, he raised from the dead and gave a second life to. But practically all our poets complain about this. Ghalib ne to keh diya कि इब्ने मरियम हुआ करे कोई, अरे मेरे दुख की दवा करे. You see, even a prophet who is raising the dead does not have a, an answer for what I'm suffering. What is that? Mere dukh ki, wo kya dukh hai? So he can cure somebody, but he can't heal. What a challenge to Hazrat Isa. And I'll end with reading this beautiful ghazal by Mustar Khairabadi. It is so lovely. And again, it's a kind of a lamentation about the misunderstanding between cure and healing. And here Mustar Khairabadi is writing, in the early 1900s. And what does he say? इलाजे दर्द दिल तुमसे मसीहा हो नहीं सकता. I mean, again, दर्द दिल का इलाज तो हजरत ईसा के पास भी नहीं है. इलाजे दर्द दिल तुमसे मसीहा हो नहीं सकता, तुम अच्छा कर नहीं सकते, मैं अच्छा हो नहीं सकता. तुम्हें चाहूं, तुम्हारे चाहने वालों को भी चाहूं, मेरा दिल फेर दो, मुझसे ये झगड़ा हो नहीं सकता. और उदू को छोड़ दो, फिर जान भी मांगो तो हाजिर है, पर तुम ऐसा कर नहीं सकते और ऐसा हो नहीं सकता. एंड दिस एक्चुअली फरीदा, इस शेर में जो आप पढ़ने वाले हैं, एक अजीब खासियत है, वो ये कि यू हैव ओनली लाइक 14 to 20 words in which you have to convey your meaning in a शेर, and a profound meaning, right? So it's a no to use the same word in both lines.
Absolutely.
Complete no, but only a master could do it. अब देखिए मुस्तर खैराबादी ने इसमें क्या कह दिया. उदू को छोड़ दो, फिर जान भी मांगो तो हाजिर है, तुम ऐसा कर नहीं सकते और ऐसा हो नहीं सकता. अभी मरते हैं हम, जीने का ताना फिर न देना तुम. What a grand statement he's making. अभी मरते हैं हम, जीने का ताना फिर न देना तुम, ये ताना उनको देना जिनसे ऐसा हो नहीं सकता. How beautifully he brings the word tana in both lines. Only a master. And then the last is so beautiful. दमे आखिर मेरी बाली पे मजमा है हसीनों का. He's dying surrounded by the beautiful ones. दमे आखिर मेरी बाली पे मजमा है हसीनों का, अरे फरिश्ता मौत का फिर आए पर्दा हो नहीं सकता. तुमसे मसीहा हो नहीं सकता, तुम अच्छा कर नहीं सकते, मैं अच्छा हो नहीं सकता. So I hope that you enjoyed this poem, Farida, especially for you. And I'll end by saying to all the young people, open your hearts, have empathy, whatever you are doing, don't just look at it with your mind's eye and with your eyesight, but look with insight. Open your heart's eyes and really try to understand what Farida has said so beautifully, at every problem with a holistic view. And what Samia brought up about the inability of us to translate the advances that have been made into better policies and bringing them to the little homes and villages and bedsides of the mothers who are delivering babies. Why aren't we able to do it? Because there's no will. And why is there no will? You guys have to work at that. It's exactly the same message that Farida and Samia and I are, all three of us are giving you the same message. that all the ingredients are there. We just need the will. Where there's a will, there will be a way. And the way to find your will and strengthen your resolve is by opening the eyes of your heart.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All the
Wonderful.
forgive me
Thank
for
you.
steering the conversation out of the special avenue.
Not at all.
Thank
Acha,
you.
Thank you, Azra. Thank you very much. Two last requests. One is, can you please send us a link for your Khan talk? I'm sure lots of people here would like to attend, even though it might be more erudite than we can take, but still, it's worth stomaching something that to learn more. The second thing I want to ask is, as you said, you write very empathetically for your patients, Lady and Omar, Andrew, etc. What I found amazing was the way you related to them and the way you transcended the patient-doctor relationship, which is, Farida says that all of us experience, but in the door, pay your bill, out the door with a quick prescription, but that's besides the point. One thing that I recall very carefully that you said about Omar, that he had compiled a list of 100 books that you must read to live. Will you share that list with us? I'd like to put it up on our website so that our kids can read. I try and encourage the kids here. One thing that we've kind of lost in Pakistan, the habit of reading. And I try and encourage our kids to read all the time. We've got a list of books that we give them all the time, and we try and have reading competitions. So it would be very nice if you could give us that list. We'll put it up, Omar's list. That will be a nice memory of him too, because I kind of relate to him from what you wrote about him. And your Khan thing. So folks, this has been a treat. I've really enjoyed our conversation with you, Azra. And from time to time, we'll call.
Can I make a very quick comment,
Please
please?
go ahead. Please go ahead.
मैं बिल्कुल this has been and if Azra is speaking anywhere, it's not possible to do it without poetry and literature. So yes, I feel that for young people, what I have found useful in my own life in learning and understanding about life is just reading. जैसे Azra ने शुरू में कहा था कि just read everything. And for me, reading is like, and I know Azra that you also like Emily Dickinson very much. I discovered that Emily Dickinson when I was young and in college, and I just carry her on my shoulders with me everywhere. I don't have the memory to commit it to memory. But एक उसकी जो line है from one of her poems, I forget which one it is, that she says, I taste a liquor brewed from tankards scooped in pearl. So that's how I feel when I read. I read stories and I read junk and I read dramas and I read whatever I can. So yeah, I just wanted to add that 100 books list would be very, very useful. It's like drinking from a tankard, of scoop and pearl. So thank you very much.
We'll put up Omar's list on the PIDE website if you allow it. And thank you very much, Azra. It's been a treat. It's been wonderful. We will call upon you again from time to time to give us some talk just to help the kids.
Absolutely.
Thank you, folks. You can see Azra on the Literary Festival, Think Fest. She's on the literary side. She doesn't talk about medicine there. She talks about literature. So all the best, folks. Thank you, Azra. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you to my interlocutors. Thank you to the students. Thank you to Asma, Samia, and Nadeem. Really honored to be here. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.